All right, let's dive into one of the most famous and, frankly, one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. We're talking about the Milgram experiment.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. Would you hurt another person if someone in a position of authority told you to? Now I know what you're thinking. No way. Absolutely not. We all like to believe we're good people, right? That we think for ourselves. But what if I told you that confidence might be a little misplaced? Well, back in 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram decided he wasn't just going to ask that question. He was going to test it. And what he found out, wow, it completely shook our understanding of human nature. This wasn't just some hypothetical scenario. He set up a real experiment to measure obedience in a lab.
Okay, so let's get into the setup. How did he actually do this? Well, the whole thing was brilliantly disguised. It was pitched to volunteers as a simple learning experiment, to see if punishment helped people remember things better. So when people showed up to participate, they were given a role. They were always assigned to be the teacher. Their job, to test another person, the learner, on a list of word pairs. And this learner, they were told, was just another volunteer, just like them, sitting in the next room. The process itself seemed pretty simple. The teacher asks a question. If the learner gets it wrong, the teacher has to flip a switch and deliver an electric shock. Simple enough, right? But here's the kicker. For every single wrong answer, the voltage of that shock was supposed to go up. Okay, but here's where it all gets turned on its head. This is the big secret of the whole experiment. The learner, the person getting shocked, was actually an actor. And the shocks? Totally fake. They weren't real. The only person being studied here was the teacher. They were the real guinea pig, and they had absolutely no clue. So as you can imagine, what started out as a kind of boring memory test, well, it didn't stay that way for long. It became a huge moral crisis for the teacher, because the actor in the other room, he really started to put on a show. At first, it was just grunts of pain. But as the shocks got stronger, the learner would start yelling. He'd scream things like, "Let me out of here. I have a heart condition." He would beg and plead for them to stop. And then, at the highest voltages, just silence. Now, think about the teacher in this situation. They were hearing all of this. People were sweating, they were stuttering, they were laughing nervously, they were clearly in extreme distress. You could see them looking at the experimenter, begging with their eyes, saying things like, "I don't think I can do this." They did not want to keep going. But every time they hesitated, every time they looked for a way out, the experimenter, this guy in a gray lab coat, would just calmly say something like, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires that you continue." That's it. No threats, no shouting, just a simple, firm, authoritative instruction. So that's the setup. You've got someone screaming in pain on one side and a calm authority figure telling you to keep going on the other. This is the moment of truth. What do you think happened? What did these normal, everyday people actually do? The result is just shocking. It's a number that has bothered psychologists for over half a century. Over 60%. Over 60% of the participants went all the way to the final, highest shock level. We're talking about switches labeled danger, severe shock, XXX. They kept going even after the guy in the other room had gone completely terrifyingly silent. And this is the part that just gets you. Remember, the shocks weren't real. Nobody was actually getting hurt. But the teachers, they didn't know that. They 100% believed they were causing extreme, maybe even fatal pain to another person. The pain was fake, but their choice to inflict it, that was as real as it gets. So this just leaves you with this huge, nagging question, right? Why? Why on earth did so many regular, seemingly good people do something so awful? Something that clearly went against every moral fiber in their body. Well, Milgram came up with a few ideas. First, the power of authority. I mean, this was happening at Yale University, with a serious scientist in a lab coat giving the orders. That carries a lot of weight. Second, the participants kind of passed the buck. They felt like the scientist was the one responsible, not them. They were just following orders. And finally, it's just really, really hard for most of us to say no to someone who seems to be in charge. And that leads to a really uncomfortable truth about all of us, doesn't it? What the experiment showed is that you don't have to be some kind of monster to do monstrous things. Turns out, regular, everyday people like you and me, are capable of some pretty scary stuff when the situation is right. So let's bring this all back home. It's so easy for us to sit here and judge those people, isn't it? To say, oh, I would never do that. But the real power of this experiment is that it forces us to stop pointing fingers and instead take a hard look in the mirror.
And that's the question Milgram really left us with. If you were the one sitting in that chair, hearing those screams, with that scientist staring at you, what would you have done? Can you honestly 100% say for sure that you would have gotten up and walked out? It's a lot to think about.